go into a new topic. Let's talk about your application to that brings us here today. And I want to talk. I want you to tell the hearing officer when you first considered making an application to St. George, and what were the circumstances that prompted you to prepare this application.
Sure. A few months after we began to provide the service to Dixie Regional Medical Center, I was asked to meet with members of the City Council and City Attorney of St. George, and we had breakfast, and I believe our counsel, Steve Urquhart, here in St. George, was there at the meeting. And basically, they had heard from hospital people how good of a job we were doing.
Excuse me, so that was about 3 years ago?
Yes, yeah, about 3 years ago. They had heard through the acquaintances of the hospital that we were doing a very good job for them. And they asked in that meeting, you know, what I thought of the service they were getting from Dixie Ambulance in St. George. And at the time, I only had specific knowledge about what had affected our presence with the hospital, which I knew had not pleased the hospital. They were not happy with the service from Dixie Ambulance, and so that's why we were there. And so I spoke to that a little bit. They asked if I wouldn't evaluate, take a look at what Dixie was doing on 911 calls and give them a recommendation. After some months of evaluation as best I could and trying to see what was transpiring on 911 calls in the city of St. George, it became clear to me that they were not adequately served. They were not getting reliable response times. They were not getting adequate resources. They didn't have enough ambulances on staff to provide for as big a service area as they were providing for. They had made at one point they were operating the 3 ambulances in a rescue truck, a separate vehicle, paramedic rescue, under the paramedic rescue license. They were operating that, and at some point they discontinued that rescue. So under that paramedic rescue license, they had stopped.
My friend,
Interrupt for just a second here. This note says we need to take care of housekeeping matters.
may we proceed? Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Moffitt, before we had a break, you were talking about an investigation that you did 2-3 years ago to determine whether Gold Cross would be interested in making an application for the 911 ground ambulance service. And were you done with your answer on that? But why don't you just continue?
Okay.
Excuse me, I don't believe that was the question. It wasn't that he was requested to make an application, but he was to do an inquiry. Was that, am I wrong?
You're correct. I was talking about doing the inquiry.
Oh,
That's what I said.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I began to look into the readily available information that I could gather. I had staff do an analysis. We grounded some response time data from St. George Dispatch, and we did an analysis of that.
When you say GRAMA, you mean under the Government Records Management Act?
Yes. We requested certain data, and we analyzed that. We looked at their staffing levels. At about that time, I believe it was November of 2010, they stopped operating their separate rescue vehicle and just placed one paramedic on each ambulance, which raised a big red flag with me, because I had remembered that in 2003, Dixie Ambulance Service had approached the Emergency Medical Committee, the EMS Committee, which is appointed by the governor to adopt rules and regulations for the EMS system, and they're the ones that were the only ones that are able to grant a waiver to any of the rules. In 2003, Dixie Ambulance had come up and requested before the committee a waiver to operate with one paramedic and one EMT on their ambulances, and after an investigation at that time, that waiver was withdrawn and was never granted. So it was interesting to me to see that in November of 10, they chose to not ask for a waiver, but just go ahead and change the service level to 1 paramedic on an ambulance. That in and of itself is not an issue, because the state rule doesn't care how the paramedics get to the scene or on what vehicle or vehicles. What is important is the state rule says that there shall be 2 paramedics on the scene of the call. And it really doesn't even differentiate between Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, or Delta level calls. It says 2 paramedics on the scene. So if you're a paramedic provider, I would interpret that to mean that you have to have 2 paramedics on the scene of every call you respond to. So that, and then an analysis of their response times, which showed that they were they weren't in compliance with any sort of a standard that you could point to. I went back and talked with the same 2 people again and expressed the findings, and they were concerned enough to, we initiated a discussion on options. Talked about whether or not the city would be better served to do an RFP under state law for ambulance service, or whether Gold Cross would be interested in doing a community necessity application, at which time I told them that if the city wanted us to do that, that I would go down that avenue and produce a community necessity application. And that's what we did. And we subsequently turned that into the state in May of 2011.